a newlywed bride.
Right.
Her husband leaves for battle the literal morning after their wedding.
Right, just hours later.
Exactly. And instead of dreading his departure or, clinging to him and begging him to stay, she immediately calls 4 witnesses. She proudly declares to them that they consummated the marriage, knowing full well her husband is likely going to die.
And that her unborn child will grow up as an orphan.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It completely defies modern logic. Today, for our deep dive, we are exploring the life of Prophet Muhammad, the legacy of the greatest man who ever lived, and we're decoding a level of psychological and spiritual resilience from the aftermath of the Battle of Uhud that is just mind-blowing.
It really is. When you read these sources, it doesn't feel like just reading history. It feels like you're looking at a completely different blueprint for, well, what the human heart is actually capable of enduring. We're looking well beyond the physical clash of swords today.
Yeah, because we really want to uncover exactly how this community fundamentally redefined what it meant to live, to love, and to sacrifice. They achieved a status that feels almost mythic, honestly.
But the mechanisms behind that devotion are deeply human and, incredibly fascinating to unpack.
So let's start right there with that newlywed bride.
Right.
Because to truly grasp the legacy of this era, we have to look at how this overarching spiritual devotion completely overrode normal, everyday human desires. There's really no better example of this than the story of Hanzala.
Ah, yeah, Hanzala. The night before the Battle of Uhud, he gets married.
Right. So for anyone listening, just put yourself in that headspace for a second. Think about the attachment, the warmth, the anticipation you feel when you are finally starting your life with someone.
But then the very next morning, the call goes out.
Mhm.
And Hanzala is in such a desperate hurry to answer that call that he leaves his bride and rushes out without even taking the ritual shower of purification, the ghusl.
Yeah, he's just on foot. But he fearlessly charges at Abu Sufyan, the leader of the opposing army. And Abu Sufyan is heavily armored and mounted on a horse.
Which, purely from a military standpoint, is a massive tactical disadvantage. It shows this absolute disregard for self-preservation.
Totally.
And that disadvantage does play out physically. Hanzala is struck down with a fatal blow. But the narrative quickly shifts from this tragic battlefield casualty into something entirely transcendent.
Right, because after the dust settles, the prophet reveals an extraordinary vision to his companions. He tells them he saw Hanzala suspended between heaven and earth.
Being washed by angels.
Yes, washed by angels with water from paradise, using vessels of silver. Because he rushed out to serve his purpose without his ritual purification, the angels themselves descended to perform it. And from that day on, he became known to history as the one washed by the angels.
It's an incredible image, but, the story circles back to his bride, Jamila, and this is where I really had to pause and rethink things.
Oh, same here.
The morning he leaves, she calls those 4 witnesses to confirm the marriage was consummated. Why? Because the night before, she actually had a vision of her own.
A dream, right.
Yeah, she dreamed the sky opened up for Hanzala, he walked through, and the sky closed right behind him. So she knew with absolute certainty he was going to be martyred.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I have to play devil's advocate here. A modern listener hears this and thinks, well, this sounds almost tragic.
Oh, definitely.
We spend our whole lives trying to build a stable home, to grow old with someone. It is so hard for the modern mind to comprehend why a bride would be proud or even happy to lose her husband the very next day, like actively hoping to bear his child, knowing that child would be fatherless.
What's fascinating here is that it forces us to examine our own definitions of security.
How so?
Well, for the modern mind, security is exactly what you just described: a long life, a stable home, a predictable retirement plan. But for this generation, the ultimate security wasn't earthly at all. It was eternity.
They just viewed the world differently.
Exactly. They didn't view death as an interruption of life. They viewed earthly life as a brief waiting room for their actual eternal existence.
A waiting room, I like that.
Yeah, so when you completely flip that paradigm, Jamila didn't view her husband's death as a senseless loss or a wasted youth. She viewed it as a triumphant trade. She traded a few decades of earthly companionship for a permanent, legendary legacy.
And it worked out right. She did conceive that night.
She did. They had a son, Abdullah, who grew up without a father, but with this unparalleled badge of honor.
I read that whenever anyone asked who he was, he wouldn't just give his name. He would proudly declare, "I am the son of the one washed by the angels."
Just incredible confidence.
It is. And when you look at it through the lens of that waiting room paradigm, their total disregard for physical danger starts to make a lot more sense.
It really does.
In the sources we're looking at, the veil between life and death is practically transparent. Like, take the story of Abdullah bin Haram.
Oh, that's a powerful one.
He's killed at Uhud, and his family is naturally gathered around his body, weeping. The prophet walks by and tells them, whether you weep for him or not, the angels went on shading him with their wings.
And the sources go deeper into that specific moment. The prophet later reveals to Abdullah's son that God actually spoke directly to his father.
Right there on the battlefield.
Exactly.
Yeah.
God greeted Abdullah right where he fell, called him by name, and asked him, "What is your wish, Abdullah? What do you wish me to do with you?"
And his answer completely subverts your expectations. He doesn't ask for a palace. He doesn't ask for endless riches or comfort.
What does he ask for?
He says, "My Lord, return me to the world so that I may fight again for you and be killed once more."
Wow.
Yeah, and the sources make a point to highlight that absolutely no one in paradise ever asked to return to this world to face the agony of death again, except for the martyrs. Because to them, it doesn't feel like agony.
Right, because the descriptions of their state post-death are incredibly vivid. The souls of the fallen are described as residing in the crops of green birds, flying freely wherever they wish around the rivers of paradise.
That's such a beautiful visual.
It is. And resting on golden candelabras suspended in the shade of the divine throne. They are so enveloped in joy that their only lingering desire is to somehow send a message back to the people they left behind, telling them not to be afraid.
But I want to push back on this again, just to make sure we're really unpacking the psychology here.
Sure.
Isn't there a danger in romanticizing death to this degree? Like, someone listening might think this sounds a bit nihilistic, like they didn't value the lives they were actually living on Earth.
That is a really crucial distinction to make. It wasn't nihilism at all. Nihilism suggests that life has no inherent meaning, so nothing matters. This mindset was the exact opposite. Life has so much profound meaning and is so deeply connected to a divine purpose that giving it up for that cause is the ultimate fulfillment. They weren't seeking death out of despair. They were embracing it out of a supreme confidence in what came next.
And that confidence wasn't just based on internal feelings. The sources document moments where this spiritual reality seemingly crashed right into the physical world.
The 46-year miracle.
Yes. Let's look at what happened roughly 50 years later during the Umayyad era. They were digging a canal near the battlefield of Uhud and accidentally uncovered some of the graves, including the grave of Jabir's father.
They had to halt the digging and call the surviving relatives to help identify and carefully move the bodies. And what they uncovered completely contradicted our natural understanding of biology and decay.
To put it mildly, yeah. After nearly half a century in the dirt, the bodies were found perfectly preserved.
It's mind-blowing.
The sources state they looked as though they were merely asleep. One man's hand had been resting over his fatal wound. When they gently moved his hand, the 50-year-old wound actively started bleeding fresh blood.
Wait, really? Fresh blood after 50 years?
Yes, and a spade accidentally nicked the foot of Hamza, the prophet's uncle, and blood flowed from that too. And the graves emitted this overwhelming fragrance of musk.
It's just reality bending.
It is. Then you have the account of a woman who used to visit the graves to offer greetings of peace. She stood near the grave of Hamza, offered her greeting, and heard a clear, audible physical reply emanating from beneath the earth.
Just casually hearing a voice from the grave.
Right. I want you to just imagine walking around with that level of absolute, tangible certainty about what happens after you close your eyes for the final time.
This raises an important question, though. If you think about how much the subconscious fear of death manipulates our daily choices, it's staggering.
Oh, it dictates everything. Our anxieties, our ethical compromises, our hesitations.
Exactly. Now imagine a society where that underlying dread is entirely removed. That unflinching certitude birthed their bravery. They weren't fighting with the frantic desperation of people trying to survive at all costs. They fought with the calm confidence of people who knew exactly where their journey ended.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if this absolute certainty and the physical act of dying in battle was so elevated, you might assume that just showing up to the battlefield was the magic ticket.
Right, like an automatic pass.
Yeah, but the sources reveal a fascinating pivot here. It wasn't the act of dying itself that guaranteed paradise, it was the invisible internal intention. The battlefield was merely the external stage, but the human heart was the actual theater of war.
Yes, the texts dive deeply into the philosophical contrast between the good ending and the evil ending. It establishes that the physical action, no matter how heroic it looks on the outside, is essentially meaningless without a pure spiritual anchor.
A good way to visualize this for us today is to imagine two coworkers doing the exact same charitable action. Let's say they're both spending their weekend building a house for a family in need.
Okay, noble cause.
Right. Coworker A is doing it purely out of deep empathy and a desire to help. Coworker B is doing it solely to record a time-lapse video for Instagram to get likes and brand deals.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
To anyone walking by, the physical labor looks absolutely identical. They are sweating the exact same amount. But the moral weight of what they are doing is completely different. And the sources give us a brutal, high-stakes example of this with a fighter named Quasman.
Quasman was a force of nature on the battlefield. I mean, he fought like a lion, single-handedly killing 7 enemies and suffering massive injuries in the process. To all the companions watching him, he was a hero of the highest order.
But the intention wasn't there.
No, it wasn't. As he lay dying and people came to congratulate him on achieving paradise, Quasman revealed the actual state of his heart. He admitted he had no real interest in the faith or the divine cause. He said he only fought to protect the honor and pride of his specific tribe.
His intention was entirely rooted in ego.
Exactly. And the tragic reality, according to the text, is that his ending was classified as an evil one. All of that immense physical sacrifice amounted to nothing in the divine scales because the intention was hollow.
But then you see the exact inverse in a man named Amr ibn Ukush.
Oh, yes.
Here was someone who had practically no, quote-unquote, good deeds on his spiritual resume. He hadn't spent decades praying, fasting, or studying. On the very day of the battle, he simply accepted the faith with total, unshakable sincerity. He went out, fought, and was killed.
And he was granted the highest levels of paradise. The prophet even posed it as a riddle later to his companions, asking them, "Tell me about a man who entered paradise without praying a single prayer."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's the ultimate equalizer. It democratizes salvation. It means you don't need a lifetime of perfect actions if your heart is absolutely true in your final moments.
You also see this beautifully illustrated by Mukarik, a wealthy Jewish man in Medina.
Yeah, tell us about him.
So he wasn't legally or culturally obligated to fight at Uhud, but he recognized the truth of the prophet's mission, fought alongside him, and declared that if he died, his massive wealth, 7 entire orchards, should be given to the prophet.
7 orchards, that's huge.
A fortune. He was killed, the prophet called in the best of Jews, and those orchards were turned into the very first charitable endowment, or ROF, in Medina.
Which is a mechanism that ensures his pure intention continued to bear fruit, literally and metaphorically, long after his death.
Exactly. It proves that the legacy of this era was heavily rooted in that internal purity. The internal state entirely dictates the external reward.
Now, if this internal certainty gave the believers such ultimate peace, it makes you wonder how it affected the people fighting against them. Did the enemies sense this unshakable reality?
Oh, they definitely did, even if they wouldn't admit it.
Because the gravity of the prophet's presence and the truth of his word was so powerful, it seemed to fundamentally alter his fiercest enemies on a deep psychological level. The story of Ubay bin Khalaf is a masterclass in this kind of cognitive dissonance.
Ubay was one of the most arrogant and fierce opponents of the prophet. He used to gloat publicly, feeding his horse a special diet of corn and constantly declaring to anyone who would listen that he was going to kill the prophet while riding that very horse.
And how does the prophet respond to these constant public death threats? He doesn't launch into a defensive speech. He doesn't posture.
What does he do?
He just calmly responds with a single, quiet sentence. "No, I will kill you."
Just that absolute certainty again.
Fast forward to the chaos of Uhud. Ubay spots the prophet and charges at him on that exact horse. The prophet's companions immediately move to intercept him, but the prophet tells them to stand down. He picks up a spear and shakes it.
And the sources note that he shook it so violently that his companions flew off him like flies off the back of a camel.
You can just picture the raw physical and spiritual power of that specific moment.
So intense.
He throws the spear at Ubay, who is heavily armored from head to toe. The spear just catches a tiny gap between the helmet and the chest plate. It doesn't impale him. It doesn't cause a massive laceration.
It just scratches his neck, right?
Literally just a scratch. There's not even any real bleeding. Essentially just a bruise from the physical impact.
Yeah.
But Ubay falls off his horse and runs desperately back to his camp, bellowing like a terrified bull.
He is screaming to his army, "Muhammad has killed me!"
And his own people are looking at this tiny scratch on his neck, completely confused. They are trying to calm him down, telling him he's fine, it's just a scrape.
But Ube's response reveals the sheer psychological terror he was under. He tells them, if he had done nothing but spit on me, I would die, because he told me he would kill me.
Wow.
He was so completely consumed by the terror of the prophet's word that his body basically shut down, and he died shortly after on the journey back.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that, because it is fascinating. Ube had all the physical armor in the world, but he had zero psychological armor.
None at all.
Subconsciously, on a level he probably couldn't even admit to himself, he knew he was fighting a true prophet. He knew the prophet's words were an absolute reality.
Wow.
The cognitive dissonance of fighting a truth you secretly believe in literally tore his nervous system apart.
It was the certitude of the prophet manifesting as fatal terror in his enemy's heart. It highlights that the battles they fought were as much spiritual as they were physical.
Exactly. Now, if you want to understand the actual emotional foundation of this society, we absolutely cannot just talk about the men on the battlefield.
No, not at all.
We have to look at the women who absorbed the deepest impacts of this conflict. Today, we constantly throw around words like resilience, sacrifice, and love. We use them as theoretical, almost intangible concepts. The women of Uhud took those concepts and made them bleed and breathe.
They were the very spine of the community. They redefined human strength. Take someone like Nusayba.
Oh, her story is unbelievable.
When the battle turned chaotic and the prophet's life was in direct, imminent danger, she didn't flee to safety. She took up a sword and physically defended him, throwing herself into the fray and suffering 13 severe wounds.
13 wounds. And we need to be clear about what medical treatment looked like back then.
Oh, it was brutal.
Her worst injury was a massive strike to her shoulder. To treat an open wound like that, they had to pour boiling oil directly into it to cauterize it. She later said the healing process was far more agonizing than the strike itself.
I can't even imagine.
The wound took an entire year to heal, yet the very next morning after the battle, she tried to stand up to join the army again to pursue the enemy. She only stopped because her body physically collapsed. Her spirit was entirely willing to go back out there, but her biology just couldn't bear it.
And alongside that staggering physical heroism, you have examples of immense emotional composure.
Yeah.
Consider Safiya, the sister of Hamza.
Right.
As we mentioned earlier, Hamza was killed, but his body was also heavily mutilated by the enemy in a really horrific display.
When Safiya demanded to see her brother, the companions tried to gently stop her. They wanted to spare her the trauma of seeing him like that.
Naturally.
But she insisted. She walked up and stood over the heavily mutilated body of her beloved brother. And she didn't collapse into hysterics. She remained perfectly calm, prayed for him, and uttered the profound words, "To Allah we belong, and to Him do we return."
Which is such a deeply liberating psychological framework to live by. Think about modern attachment. We cling so tightly to things because we believe we own them.
Right, my money, my house, my family.
Exactly. But if you truly believe that everything you love, your wealth, your family, your health, your own life, is actually just property on loan to you from a higher power, it completely changes the mechanics of grief. When you lose something precious, it is not a cosmic injustice. It is simply the owner calling his property back.
That shifts everything. But I love that the sources don't paint these women as emotionless, stoic statues. They show raw, nuanced human emotion.
Yes, like Hamna bin Josh.
Exactly. When the army returns to Medina, messengers tell her that her father has been killed. She remains composed, praises God, and prays for him. Then they tell her that her brother has been killed. Again, she stays calm and prays for his soul.
But then they tell her that her husband has been killed.
And she completely breaks down and lets out a scream.
And the prophet witnessed this breakdown. He recognized the unique, intense emotional bond between a husband and wife. She explained later that her scream wasn't a sudden loss of faith. It was the overwhelming, instantaneous realization that her children were now orphans.
It's a perfect encapsulation of their humanity, interwoven with their faith. They felt the pain of loss deeply, but they processed it through a higher lens.
And then finally, there is the unnamed woman of the Banu Dinar tribe.
This one gives me chills.
In one single day, as the survivors return, messengers come to her and tell her she has lost her husband, she has lost her father, she has lost her brother, her entire immediate family, the core of her world, wiped out in a matter of hours.
Yet, in the midst of that unimaginable, suffocating grief, she frantically asks only one question to anyone who will listen. How is the messenger of Allah?
They try to reassure her that he is safe, but she refuses to accept their words until she can see him with her own eyes.
Yeah.
And when she finally pushes through the crowd and lays eyes on him, she declares, "Every loss other than you is trivial."
Every loss other than you is trivial. The sheer emotional weight of that statement is profound. We started this deep dive by saying this wasn't just a recap of historical conflicts.
No, not at all.
What we are witnessing in these sources is the forging of an unbreakable human spirit. It is the cementing of a legacy that, centuries later, still has the power to completely stop you in your tracks. It shows exactly what humanity is capable of when the heart is anchored to something eternal rather than temporary.
It truly does. And I want to leave you with a thought to mull over as you go about your day, building on what we've discussed. Think about the phrase Sophia used standing over her brother, that paradigm of everything being alone.
Yeah.
If you woke up tomorrow truly believing that everything you possess, your bank account, your status, even the people you love the most, is simply on loan to you from a higher power, well, how would that change the way you face your greatest fears? And how would it alter the way you process your deepest losses?